Hello, and thank you for tuning in to our weekly conversation. This week, I am joined by Vijay Prashad. He's an Indian historian, author, journalist, political commentator, and I would say one of the preeminent Marxist intellectuals of our time. Author of some 40 or so books, Vijay is also an executive director of Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, and that's among many other things which he does. So Vijay, thank you for joining us and giving us your time.
Hey, it's a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
So we will be discussing, of course, the Gaza genocide, U.S. hegemony, empire, geopolitics, all those subjects which you are an expert on. But I want to, Vijay, if I may start with the big story, which is the ceasefire in Gaza between Hamas and Israel. We are recording this show on Thursday. The ceasefire is expected to come into effect on Sunday. Just start with your thoughts on the ceasefire and whether you think it will hold.
Well, first, I have to say that after almost 500 days of sustained genocidal bombardment, any news of a ceasefire is welcome to the people who are living in Gaza. I mean, it's very difficult for people to understand and appreciate this. But the people who lived in Gaza lived in not a slum. They didn't live in tents. They lived in homes. They had shops, universities. They had movie theaters. They lived a modern life. And that modern life was ruined by sustained Israeli bombardment that destroyed city after city. These were people, urban dwellers, who were reduced to living in blue plastic tents, where for some of them, tragically, their children were freezing to death, others continuing to be bombed by the Israelis. For them to hear, even hear, that there are ceasefire talks was a relief because they were looking for the immediate cessation of bombing, and they were looking forward to the arrival of humanitarian aid because people are starving. So, from the standpoint of people living in Gaza now, any any visibility of a ceasefire is a miracle, and there was jubilation when it first began to be said that a ceasefire had been agreed, that the Qataris had been able to create some common space between Israel and the various Palestinian factions. There was jubilation. I mean, it was all over the place, the happiness. Of course, it was not looked at that there was going to be small print. One element of the small print is what you said. It starts on Sunday. So while people are out there celebrating, the Israelis continued to bomb. Within the hour, 20 more Palestinians were killed. By the end of 12 hours, 82 Palestinians were killed after the announcement of a ceasefire. I mean, nobody looks at the small print and says, oh, it starts on Sunday. They think, well, it's now, but the bombing intensified. So that was the first thing. Secondly, as per script, because we've lived through this before, as per script, the Israelis said, well, wait a minute, we are having second thoughts. We don't think that Hamas is going to live up to things. We don't think we're going to approve the ceasefire. Let's wait till the cabinet sits. Netanyahu was to have brought the cabinet together on Thursday when we are speaking, 16th of January. Eventually, he announced that, well, maybe he'll call the cabinet on Friday, the 17th of January. Now, he has a problem. Let's face it. Netanyahu has a crass political electoral problem. He's holding the Palestinian people hostages based on a very crass electoral problem that if he accepts this deal, he is in danger of losing his majority in the Knesset, that people will walk out of the cabinet and his government will fall. He's going to have to call for elections. So in order to protect his parochial, narrow political hold in Israel, he's refusing to allow a deal with the Palestinians that had been first broached. Let's let's be specific about this, which had been on the table from May of 2024. We are right now in January 2025. It's the same deal. It's sitting on the table. So this is a great place of itself of violence against the Palestinian imagination. People on the one hand thinking there's a deal, and then the Israelis dilling about and saying, I'm not sure there's a deal. They are blaming Hamas, but really the issue is the internal parochial power games in Tel Aviv, which is preventing this deal from holding. So that's where we are. There may be a deal, there may be a ceasefire on Sunday, but to be honest with you, I am not entirely confident that the ceasefire is going to hold. And even if there's a ceasefire, if you look at the case of Lebanon, where after the ceasefire, the Israelis have routinely violated it and continued to bomb southern Lebanon, there's no guarantee that they will not attack Gaza even during a ceasefire period. That is part one of the ceasefire.
And as you mentioned, this ceasefire deal was on the table some 6 months ago. And we heard just a couple of days ago, Itamar Ben-Gvir tweeting, of all things, saying that he actually torpedoed the ceasefire many, many months ago. And of course, the Western media would always say it was Hamas who torpedoed the ceasefire. It was Hamas who was unwilling to budge. But the Israelis themselves are saying it was us who did it. It was us who torpedoed this ceasefire. So I should get your thoughts on that. And also the fact that the timing. I mean, of course, we can't ignore the fact that the ceasefire deal has been struck days before Trump's inauguration. So we can't ignore the optics of this. One guy is going to claim victory to set the tone for his next 4 years. And the other guy is going to say, Biden in this case, he's hold on to some semblance of a legacy. I did something, So the optics seems to be more important in this regard than the actual value of the lives of the Palestinians. So, what do you think of those 2 points?
Well, firstly, let's go with your second point because that's the main one. 2.3 million people have had their lives disrupted. I get it that in the West there's a disagreement about how many people have died, and I've read a number of those reports and studies which quibble over 15 people, not 35. They're quibbling. 2.3 million people have had their lives disrupted completely. It's going to be impossible to easily live in this level of bombed Gaza for the next 20 odd years. The devastation is almost complete. It's a total devastation of the landscape. And to fiddle about with legacy on this ruin is vulgar. It's vulgar for Biden after all this, after all the 2,000-pound bombs that he has sent to the Israelis to conduct this utter desertification of Gaza is vulgar. Seriously, you are going to claim some moral high ground from this? It's a mountain of skulls, and you want to stand upon it and say that I've prevented the mountain from going from 100 feet to 200 feet? That is vulgar. That is a level of vulgarity that we haven't seen in a long time. Trump, on the other hand, has never pretended not to be vulgar. That's his whole thing. He's immediately claimed victory for what? For this? How is this a victory for anybody? Everybody should be hanging their heads in shame at the end of this. This ceasefire deal should give nobody joy except the Palestinians, who now can at least say, well, our children will not be killed immediately, blankets will come in, and so on. Everybody else should be hanging their heads in shame, frankly. There is no honor to be divided among these people, Tel Aviv, Washington. There is no honor. I refuse to allow them to claim anything called credit on the one side. Secondly, the issue of who scuttles the deal. Now, it is interesting that we've been through this before. I've reported on the punctual bombardment of Gaza ever since the Israelis left their settlements and began to garrote Gaza from outside. They have, after 2006-7, have punctually bombed Gaza. The most impressive previous bombing was the bombing in 2014, Cast-led 2009, and so on. Punctual, hideous bombardment. Every time there's a bombardment like this, the Israelis and the various factions, they keep saying Hamas, but often they are negotiating actually with a group of factions. And always the table is set by Egypt or Qatar or somebody. This is a cliche. They've been through this over and over again. When there's a disagreement, the Israelis with the loudest microphone blame Hamas. This is what always happens. The Israelis have the loudest microphone. Whatever Mr. Netanyahu says, or any Israeli prime minister, is what the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, that's what they report. Israel has the loudest microphone. When it says it's Hamas's fault, that's how it's constructed. But of course, Hamas walks out of the meeting and says Israel is being intransigent. They blame Israel. That's the nature of a negotiation. Yeah. In most cases, in my experience, and we can go down the list, in most cases, Hamas concedes a lot. In most cases, Israel keeps demanding more. So, for instance, the so-called disagreement now is very interesting. Israel is angry that Hamas has given a list of names of prisoners that they would like to see released. Okay, Israel wants to pick and choose who they want to release in the exchange. Hamas says, no, we would like to have a say in it. How is this a reason to scuttle the deal? This is a half an hour conversation. Come back into the room, go over the names. Israel can say these 10 people we are not releasing. They are, too dangerous people to release or whatever. Political people, we don't want to release them. Okay, continue this is a second order negotiation. Okay, you've already agreed to the outlines of the deal. Then you're just disputing the names on a list. This is not, you don't even need the primary negotiators in the room. You send in the second team to talk through the details. So Israel is pretending that this second order disagreement is a primary disagreement. When we know, and as you quite correctly said, when we know that the problem is not about what Hamas is saying now, the problem is within Israel. Israel has a broken political system. It has a disrupted, politics where basically everybody is to the right, and they are one step further to the right from each other. Each of them trying to, be way more ruthless against the Palestinians. I mean, it's surprising. Sometimes Mr. Netanyahu appears quite moderate compared to some of his bedfellows in the cabinet. So there's nothing that Hamas is doing to prevent the deal. Hamas has come there and said, I think in pretty good faith, that they want to settle this matter. They don't have an advantage in continuing the bombardment of the Palestinian people. There is no advantage to Hamas for there to be no peace deal. Okay, they are not vying for position on the battlefield or anything. They want a deal. It's Israel who's intransigent. But because they have the louder megaphone, the British media, the US media, the German media, they're all reporting it as if Hamas is the one at fault. That's about the size of the megaphone, not about the facts on the ground.
I want to also get your thoughts sticking to the ceasefire. There was something Blinken, US Secretary of State, said a few days ago, that Hamas is far from being annihilated, that it was recruiting to the tune of tens of thousands of soldiers. And many, yourself and many others, would have said, if you're going to conduct a war of annihilation on a population, of course, there'll be many thousands of young Palestinians who would join the ranks of Hamas because of the sheer oppression and injustice that had been inflicted upon them. So given that the initial genocide began with the war aim of annihilating Hamas, and now it turns out, according to even Blinken's own admission, that Hamas has not been destroyed, what are we to make of that fact?
Well, let's be quite clear that the war aim isn't to annihilate Hamas. It was to annihilate the Palestinian resistance, because Hamas is only one front in this. Hamas was born in 1987. The Palestinian resistance starts in the 1930s, okay, when the Great Palestine Revolt takes place in 1936 against the British colonialism. So Palestinian resistance has a much longer history than Hamas. Hamas has got a small role in it from 1987 to an important role, but not the whole role. It's not the same. You can't annihilate the Palestinian resistance. You can't keep occupying a people and then expect there to be no resistance. This is something that is absolutely straightforward, that the only way for the resistance to end is if the occupation ends. That's a fact. I mean, no people completely surrender. They continue to struggle one way or the other. Now, it may be that after 100 years, the Palestinians will be exhausted and they'll say, well, look, let's throw in the towel. Let's move to the Sinai or whatever. It's not impossible. It has happened in world history that populations have said, look, we can't win. We have an intransigent opponent. Nobody is giving us support. Let's throw in the towel. We have lives to lead. We have children to raise and so on. We can't keep giving our children as martyrs. That's not impossible, but it's not the case now. Within the Palestinian community, at least inside Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, sections of Jordan, Lebanon, and so on, where there's large communities, people continue to aim for a Palestinian future. They have not given up. So if they don't give up, then the resistance is going to continue. People are going to sign up. What Blinken is saying is also a lie. It's true that lots of young people are wanting to sign up to fight against the Israelis. But what's not true is that, let's say, Hamas is what it was before October 7th of 2023. It is much weakened because its lines of logistical support, weaponry, and so on are no longer as easily available. I mean, the Israelis have pummeled Hamas's storage depots and so on. They don't have the stores of missiles. Israel has wiped out large parts of the missile storage of Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon. They continue to bomb Lebanon, as I said. And in October of last year, 2024, the Israelis they sent aircraft into Iranian airspace and bombed Iranian factories that produce short-range missiles, which had been finding their way to Hezbollah, some to Hamas, of course, to Ansar Allah in Yemen, and so on. The Israelis have weakened the ability of these military forces to strike against Israel. They've weakened their ability to fire rockets. So it is both true that Hamas, Islamic Jihad, other groups will continue to recruit people because, my God, you wipe out my whole family. What is left for me? I'm going to fight for their honor, for their name, not just in revenge, but to validate their existence. I'm going to fight. 300 families were wiped out, entire family names. If there's one survivor, they're going to join up. So, yeah, there's going to be lots of recruits. The issue is that the Palestinian resistance is going to have a really hard time because in Syria, I'm afraid that the new government of Mr. Julani has made it very clear that there will be no attack on Israel from Syrian soil. This means also perhaps that there will be no land bridge from Iran to Syria, which will provide some of the military material to the Palestinian resistance. And I'm actually quite afraid that this Syrian government might sign a peace deal with the Israelis, which would mean that then Jordan, Egypt, and Syria would have a peace deal. The only country without a peace deal would be Lebanon. They have taken away the hinterland of the Palestinian resistance. They don't have access to Egypt. They don't have access to Jordan. Since Black September 1970, the Palestinian resistance hasn't been able to regroup in Jordan. And they won't have access to Syria. Lebanon is very difficult because Lebanon anyway has denied the Palestinian resistance since 1982 the right to conduct operations from Lebanese soil. So suddenly, Palestinian armed resistance will be off the table. Think about that. I mean, Mr. Netanyahu's speech in December, where he said that I promised to change the Middle East and I have, he was talking the truth. They have made it very difficult for the Palestinian armed resistance to act against Israel. This is a fact. And I think this is a sobering reality.
Press you on this,
yes, please.
Can I press on you on this? So both sides will claim that Israel's genocide on Gaza has changed the world. And it's true, whichever side you may fall on. If you're on the Israeli side, you'll say, look what's happened. Israel has broken the back of the so-called axis of resistance, which you are mentioning. Syria, under Jolani, could end up signing a normalization treaty under the so-called Abraham Accords during the Trump administration. So everything looks bad. But then on the other hand, many have said, look at the rising global consciousness, Israel becoming a pariah state. I spoke with a number of scholars on Palestine, Ilan Pape. He thinks we're at the beginning of the end of the Zionist colonial project. Today, I met with another Palestinian Israeli academic, Yuri Davis, and I asked him to review his life and tell me where does he feel Israel is heading. He's saying, if I live till 90, we will see the end of Israel, and he's giving me a historical explanation. So where should we? What's the truth in this? So, of course, the world has changed. Israelis will say it's changed to our advantage, whereas Palestinians will say, no, it's changed to our advantage because there is now a much bigger global consciousness about the nature of the Zionist project. And also, Americans are realizing that America First does not mean giving aid to Israel while your state in Florida is burning. So there's all these other developments taking shape. Where should we? What should be our focus on this?
I mean, I think all these things are true. It's a matter of timing. It's a matter of when things happen. So I think in the short term, it is absolutely without a doubt that the Palestinian and the Lebanese resistance have been weakened. And I really do worry about what's going to happen with Syria. On the other hand, there's a longer term perspective that one has to take. As it looks like the Palestinian struggles are not going to be able to so easily be revived in terms of, let's say, military, operations and so on. There is going to be a lot more civil protest within Palestine because conditions are going to be really bad. I mean, it's going to take 16 years, they say, to rebuild Gaza. That means 2 million people are going to live in a ruin for 16 years. There's going to be innumerable protests. There's going to be strife within Israel. I mean, there's a whole section of the Israeli population that says, we won, so we should take Gaza. Why aren't we building hotels on the shorefront? Why aren't we able to go and go surfing on the beaches of Gaza? There's going to be an internal problem within Israel. It's going to create its own problems. Israel has moved so far to the right, it's going to go further to the right and probably fall off a cliff over there. But then again, in Egypt, in Jordan, fissures are going to open up. I'm going to say something and maybe I'll regret it later. But in 1948, when the Egyptian army didn't do any damage to Israel, when Egypt went into the war of 1948 and failed, a series of sincere Egyptian patriotic military people said, "What the hell? King Farouk has spent all this money importing weapons. We have all these nice tanks, and we couldn't even defeat a country barely born. What's wrong with our country?" And that's what led then a few years later to Gamal Abdel Nasser and others conducting the coup d'etat against King Farouk, throw him out, put him in a yacht, and then the Nasserites took over. Now, it's not like the Nasserites succeeded. You remember in 1967, when Egypt was, not able to succeed in that war, Nasser said, "I'm going to resign." And thousands of people took to the streets of Cairo. Kulthum was singing, begging him not to leave, saying, no, Rais, please stay, we need you, and so on. I have been wondering over this year what's been happening in the military clubs in Zamalek and Garden City as these mid-level military officers sit around and say, we spent billions of dollars over the last 30 years importing the finest US jets, and we didn't even fly one day of no-fly zone over Gaza. Our Arab brothers were being killed there, Arab sisters killed there. Not one day did we fly our planes over Gaza calling for a no-fly zone. What's the point? I wonder the conversations in Egypt. And I hope Mr. Sisi has a hard time sleeping at night. I also wonder in Jordan, it's been now over 55 years since Black September, 1970. 55 years since the previous king of Jordan basically told the Palestinians, you can't do politics from here. In fact, we date the Jordanian peace agreement to the actual signing in 94, right? When they sit down and sign the deal with the Israelis. But in fact, it's really in 1970 that the deal is struck. The Israelis are told no more operations from Jordanian soil. Jordan, in fact, goes ahead of Egypt. Egypt follows 9 years later at Camp David. But I wonder what's happening amongst the Palestinians in Jordan. How happy are they? When I was listening to Queen Rania, the Queen of Jordan, with Christiane Amanpour twice, she went on Christiane Amanpour's show, I heard a real sense of anger. from her, that the palace allowed her to speak like that was very interesting to me. That she represented the anger herself, being Palestinian and all. So I think, for now, that's why I said it's a matter of timing and sequence. And I don't know how old the gentleman is who said when I'm 90, but it is true that now,
He's
right
he's
now,
81.
oh, well, then he has only 9 years to 90. So I was imagining a longer time frame. But now I think that there is going to be a setback, that certain kinds of things are not going to be possible. I mean, look at it this way. In the West Bank, the Israelis have basically arrested the entire upper leadership of most of the Palestinian factions. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, almost the entire leadership is in an Israeli jail. Khalida Jarrar, in and out of jail. They're not allowing the factions to have a politics in the West Bank. So for now, for the short term, there's going to be some problems. But I would caution the countries around Israel, that your peace agreements and so on are unsettling for your populations. Even Mr. Jolani, who is made these statements saying we won't allow the land, has had to make one statement telling Israel to stop violating Syrian airspace and stop bombing inside Syria. He hasn't said anything about the Golan Heights. He hasn't said anything about Israel seizing the 1974 demilitarized area, but he has said don't bomb anymore. It was more a plea than a demand. But he has to also respond to the Syrian sensibilities, which are certainly pro-Palestinian. So I agree with others that in the long term, new contradictions will open up. This is not a final defeat, but certainly this is a major setback, and I don't think we should not register the setback.
So we've spoken about the ceasefire deal and the impact of Gaza around the world. I wanted to get your thoughts on trying to understand the past 15 months and the genocide. And you've developed a concept which I think is really useful for us to get our head around, which is the idea of the international division of humanity. That, in your mind, is central to imperial logic. So how does this logic manifest in the treatment of Palestinians in Gaza, and what does it reveal about the way power is used and instrumentalized by the US and its allies?
It's a very simple thing, I've been covering this particular apartheid occupation genocide for decades, and have watched and seen the kind of brutalities inflicted on Palestinians. Let's just take the story of children, okay? I know this is not the correct way, but because grown-ups also humans and so on. But let's just take the story of children. I've covered a lot of stories in my time of young kids, teenagers being killed at checkpoints, being killed in raids and so on. Their names never make it as important. They are not lifted up and raised to the level of somebody whose life has been worth celebrating, or the loss is grave, for humanity. I've written about a lot of these stories, and I just find very few of my colleagues who are reporters from the Europe or the United States, very few of them cover these kind of stories. But when an Israeli child is killed, there is just it's just like a lot of noise. I mean, of course, I'm sad about that child being killed. Yeah, a child is killed; it's terrible. But their photograph will be in the newspaper. Their parents will be interviewed. When the raid took place, when the factions went into the surrounding parts of Gaza and grabbed hostages and so on, their stories were told everywhere. Pictures of them, their families were interviewed. Nobody bothers about the Palestinian stories. The professors, the circus clowns, the whoever gets killed. They're human beings. These 8, 9 children who have been frozen to death, in recent weeks. What is their parents' story? Why didn't they have blankets? Where are the reporters reporting this? This is the international division of humanity, that the care that is given to somebody who is white, just to be quite blunt with you, is extraordinary compared to others. When the tsunami happened in 2004, in the Indian Ocean. Okay, the tsunami, hit a bunch of resorts in Thailand. The world media focused on the tourists who were killed. There were no stories about the Thai workers. There were no stories about the fishermen from Tamil Nadu. What about their lives? Why aren't their stories lifted up and told? There's just no care. When Tenzing Norgay took Edmund Hillary to the top of Mount Everest, yeah, we celebrated in the world. Edmund Hillary is the first to climb. I've often felt that Tenzing Norgay climbed up and then pulled him up. Tenzing Norgay, who remembers his name? He was the Sherpa of Edmund Hillary, so-called first man on Mount Everest. The Sherpa is always forgotten. The Sherpa's life is irrelevant. It's the white man whose life counts for much more. This has been there right through the history of colonialism. The greatest residues of colonialism, the two great residues, are the inequality of wealth and the disregard for life. Certain people's lives are just not important. Millions of people have been killed in the Great Lakes wars in the Congo over the last 3 decades. Millions of people. Almost no care and concern. When 3,000 people get killed in New York City with the spectacular 9/11 attacks, there was a focus on each one of the people who was dead. Their pictures appeared in the New York Times. Their stories were retold over and over for good reason. They are people in the United States. But what about the people dying in the Great Lakes War who are dying basically for raw materials to come to the West? Why is there no concern? I'm not talking about why is there no coverage about the war in Sudan. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about individual stories. Can anybody name one Sudanese person who was killed in the last 3 weeks? Can somebody tell me the name of a Palestinian who was killed yesterday? Even my friends in the West who are Palestinian rights, involved in the struggle, they will remember Rachel Corrie's name. Yeah. But they won't be able to tell you the name of a Palestinian killed in the last 3 or 4 days, because Palestinian lives like that are not as central to our consciousness. And I'm saying that not from a place other than great hurt. It hurts me that that people can't feel that. As I said, 350 some families wiped out. That means the whole lineage from grandparents down wiped out. That is just like unimaginable, man. It's unimaginable. When the Bhopal incident happened, when a Union Carbide factory exploded 1984, 3,000 people died immediately in Bhopal, okay, Indian people. The leader of a US multinational corporation told the New York Times that, look, it's terrible what happened, but Indians value their lives differently than people in the United States. He said that to the New York Times. Indians value their lives differently. They just have so many children and so on. They don't value individual life. They don't have an idea of individualism. That's a Western thing. He said that to the New York Times in 1984, not in 1884, in 1984. That's quoted in the New York Times without comment. That's the international division of humanity. And it breaks my heart. It's not, again, something I'm happy to talk about. It's horrible.
And you are, as you mentioned, you're a scholar of colonialism, imperialism, but there is another concept which you developed, and I think it's also useful for us to get our heads around in understanding Israel's position in the world at the moment, which is the concept of hyper-imperialism. So please explain that and where Israel sits in that system of hyper-imperialism.
Yeah, so, I mean, our thinking has been that, right now, like, I don't know if you watched Biden's final address, which he gave at the US State Department. It's quite interesting because Biden talks about a great contest. They're in the middle of a great contest, he says. Okay. What contest are you in the middle of? We're in the middle of a great contest. And he says, we have won. We have won. During our presidency, we have prevailed in this great contest. Well, let me guess. Okay. Who's the great contest against? Because a contest, you have to have adversaries. Yeah. It's not the small jihad, it's against myself. I want to be a better person. Nothing wrong with that. You want to have a contest with yourself. You want to make yourself better. That's okay. But that's not what he meant. This isn't the United States wanting to be better. It's the United States against somebody else. So let's guess. I think the contest is against Russia and China, primary adversaries of the US. Maybe some other powers, Iran, Venezuela, and so on. But the primary, Russia and China. Now, interestingly, China doesn't believe it's in a contest. The Chinese keep saying, we want to collaborate. We don't want to have a confrontation. We think we can collaborate. We're just doing business. We don't want a war. We want to collaborate. But the US sees it as a contest. This is very significant. United States and its allies account for almost 75% of world military spending. So they have the capacity to basically wipe out any of the adversaries. China is responsible for 10% of world military spending, Russia 3%. Okay, so it's a huge military imbalance. Hyper-imperialism for us in my institute is a concept that explains from the standpoint of the United States and its allies how they see the world. They see the world as a contest where they have to use their military might to defeat their adversaries because they have understood they cannot defeat them economically. United States cannot compete with China right now to build cheaper and better high-speed rail. Not a chance. There's no way for the US to even build cheaper and better cell phones. They may be able to build better cell phones, but certainly not cheaper cell phones. If you go to most parts of Africa, Asia, Middle East, and so on, people have Chinese phones. That's just a reality because they're cheaper and they're as good as an Apple or whatever. I mean, an Apple is also a Chinese phone, but that's another story. Anyway, so this attitude that they're in a contest, that they have to be muscular and respond to their enemies with force, this is hyper-imperialism. At a small scale, this is exactly how the US and Israel are seeing things. I have a pretty idiosyncratic view of how this particular war, or rather genocidal campaign, took place against the Palestinians. I actually don't think this is merely Israel and the Palestinians. I think the Israelis had thought this through, and we hadn't seen what they were doing, until in a way it was too late. The Israelis first may have gone in as a revenge to go and smash Hamas and so on, to obliterate Hamas. But very quickly it became clear to them, this is a great opportunity to take out Hezbollah and effectively to take out the Assad government. Now, if they hadn't planned it, the outcome was beneficial to them. Because what they did, as I said earlier, quite effectively, is they, in a sense, rolled back the front line of defense for Iran that General Qasem Soleimani had built meticulously. You see, what Qasem Soleimani had built, what sometimes is called a resistance or whatever you want to call it, was he built a deterrent to the Israelis and the United States that you can't bomb Iran. See, Iran was never really interested in bombing Israel. That's not on the agenda. But Israel and the US are interested in obliterating the Iranian government. But Iran built up this resistance, which Soleimani built, where what the Iranians were saying is, if you strike Tehran, then our friends in Hezbollah, in the Iraqi resistance forces that were in Syria, in Hamas even, from maybe later Yemen and so on, are going to hit you. They're going to fire rockets and hit you. So this is a deterrent. Don't hit Iran in a big way. There can be these mutual back and forth attacks, but no big assault because we'll get you. Well, look at what they've done. They've basically, for now, rolled back a lot of the Iranian defenses in West Asia. And this is a great concern. I was interested that this year's Great Prophet war exercise took place in Western Iran. It was one of the largest military exercises the Iranian forces have conducted. They mobilized everybody. And the entire exercise was about defending Iran. This has not been there for the last 19 Great Prophet exercises. It's the first time they did a general mobilization and wanted to show that, we have enough capacity internally to defend ourselves. But the Iranians are worried. And so I think, in my opinion, is that this is hyper-imperialism in mini. In other words, I fear that when Trump comes in, they're going to start pushing hard against Iran again. And they're going to threaten Iran with a big military strike. And Iran doesn't want that, because the last thing they want is the obliteration of Tehran, a couple of other cities. This is going to set them back a generation. Iran cannot afford this. And it is pretty clear that right now, neither Russia nor China have the capacity to come in and say, we're going to shield this country. The fact that nobody could shield Syria in this period is really exemplary. The Russians just couldn't shield Syria. They shielded Syria in 2015. They couldn't do it now. This is a serious concern for Iran. And I would say that's the nature of hyper-imperialism. It's gangsterist threats by massive violence because they have the military advantage. Public opinion may be against it, okay? Look, Naseem, public opinion was against the attack on Iraq in 2003, okay? 1 million people marched to New York City. The Yankees did it anyway, okay? That's their style. They don't care about public opinion. They have military power. They can obliterate people around the world. People are scared of them. I'm a little scared of them, okay? You should be scared of them. But we need a world where we don't live in fear of them. And that's the world we are fighting to build.
I think we will see hyper-imperialism on steroids in the next 4 years. I mean, let's wait and see. I have so many more questions I wanted to ask you. Maybe we can have you on again for another show for a much longer time period. We can, talk through a lot more issues. Thank you anyway for joining us. I can see you're suffering from a cold. I hope you get better soon. And so that was Vijay Prashad joining me, Naseem Ahmed, for our weekly conversation with the Middle East Monitor. Thank you very much, and thank you for tuning in.